what we're going to start addressing today is a very fundamental problem. Namely, what we've done so far, the last 2 semesters, is we talked about algorithms, and then a few weeks ago we started with stuff such as digital signatures, hash functions. They call that protocols. They're not really protocols. People that really do cryptography say I'm lying to you, but a better name here would be other stuff, right? Algorithms, and other stuff. So what we're going to start today is we're going to introduce actual protocols. And what kind of protocols? We have to solve one very, very, very big problem, which we almost entirely ignored so far for almost 1 year. Namely, this is one possible application, right? Here we use typically block ciphers or stream ciphers. This is the setup, right? We can use AES or triple dash, something very secure, very fast for encryption and decryption. Everything works very nicely. But what is one prerequisite here? What is the Voraussetzung here before we set systems for this? What do we have to do before we have this situation here? What's missing here? K, right? We have to distribute the key. How do we get the key over? And this is where we're going to spend 3 weeks on key distribution protocol. So this is probably the first time we do something which is more or less a proper protocol. And today we start with the first things, namely the introduction to symmetric. Sie sind auf der Liste, ja? Mental, okay? Ja, gut. Ich vergesse den Namen, ja, und das Gesicht, ich weiß das nachher nicht mehr. Okay. Symmetric key distribution. So, we start with introduction to symmetric key distribution, whatever that is. And then we talk about KDC protocols. It sounds very fancy. That stands for Key Distribution Center. In about 1 hour, everybody here in the room will know what I'm talking about. It's not very complicated. Okay. So, the first chapter for today is introduction to, maybe let's call it key establishment in general. First, to give you an overview and classification of this stuff. So, okay, I have to switch to German for 1 minute. Hallo, genau. Es gab hier die Evaluierung, wir wollten nicht so viel Zeit haben, bespreche ich die beim nächsten Mal. Ein Kommentar, den wieder alle Kinder gemacht haben, ist super, dass der Herr Paar für Ruhe sorgt. Also, ich habe das Mandat von Ihnen. Das ist nur irgendwie eine Spinnerei. Es finden hier 13 Leute hier im Raum finden das gut. Ja? Die finden das so gut, die haben das als Kommentar hingeschrieben. Also, ich sorge weiter für Ruhe. Okay, so let's first look at a classification, a very rough classification. Of key establishments protocols. So when we talk about key establishment, we can distinguish between 2 principal approaches, namely key transport and what's termed key agreement. Any idea what key transport is? Or what's the difference between key transport and key agreement? Key agreement is maybe a little bit harder. Any idea when do we talk about key transport? Key transport protocol. What happens then between Alice and Bob? Who picks the key in key transport, Alice or Bob or both? Any guesses here? What do you think? Einer von beiden, right. Either Alice or Bob. Either Alice picks it and it's being transported over, or Bob's pick it and it's being transported over, or a third party picks it and it's transporting to both, right? The idea is that one party generates a key. One party chooses the key. And what is the agreement? Surprise, surprise. That's the situation when both parties are involved in generating the key. Both users, one party, both parties generate the key jointly, gemeinsam. What is your feeling? Which approach is more secure, or in what are the security implications? What do you think security-wise? What is an advantage or disadvantage of those approaches? Any idea? Bauchgefühl. Ja. Yeah, so he says if both are involved, it's harder for a third party to manipulate the protocol, which could be a good point, but I think kind of the assumption is in both cases we need solutions that are secure against OSCAR. Okay, but it was a good idea. So that's maybe a little bit of an argument. Any other arguments? Okay, I tell you one. What we have not done here, because this is only intro to cryptography, in many block ciphers, not AES, but for instance DES and the other ciphers that have what's called a weak key. That means they have, let's say, 2 to the 128 keys, and then certain keys are weak. A good example is this cipher idea for that. If this happens, for whatever reason, it could happen that maybe one party chooses a weak key. Alice is communicating with Bob, and maybe Alice has a virus in her PC system, and then the virus manipulates in a way that a weak key is being chosen here. This is one possible attack here. If both parties are involved, this is much harder to actively generate a weak key. Do we know any key agreement protocol? There's one key establishment protocol that we've did in great detail, and I told you, you have to know that. And it's public key based. It's Diffie-Hellman, right? Diffie-Hellman, if you look at Diffie-Hellman, you eventually compute blah, 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 blah. But the session key, which we often call KAB, is alpha to the AB. And this is Alice's secret key, and this is Bob's secret key, right? So this is a very simple example, and sehr einleuchtend for a key agreement protocol, because both Alice and Bob contribute to the key here. Okay, so that's it pretty much what I want to say about it. So just that you've seen this type of classification here. What we start with now is we want to look at kind of the most basic approach. How can we do key distribution? Naive approach. Which is also called, and this is kind of a famous simple assumption, simple system setup, which is called the n-square key distribution. I think I called that problem. I'm not sure whether other people call that the problem or the setup or the system. So the assumption is establish pairwise secret keys between all users. What do I mean? I give you a very simple picture. So we have, let's look at n equal 4 users. So we have a small network with 4 users. They're somehow all communicating via a network. So we have Alice and Bob, our best friends pretty much. Then we have Chris, and then we have Doro, short for Dorothy. So now all users want to communicate with each other. That means if Alice is talking to Chris, Bob and Doro shouldn't be able to listen. That's the basic setup here. You know, if you send an email on the internet is the same, except they're not 4 users, but 1 billion users, right? 1 milliard or something like that. So, and a naive approach is, okay, we know symmetric key cryptography, so every user pair gets a key. So Alice, now what kind of keys does Alice need? Well, Alice needs to share a key, okay, Alice, with Bob. She needs to share a key with Chris and with Doro or Dorothy. Okay. Now Bob needs the keys that he shares with Alice, KBC that he shares with Chris, and the key that he shares with Doro. You get the idea. And now every user gets 3 keys here. Chris gets the key KAC, KBC, and KDC. Similarly, Doro gets also 3 keys, namely the key she shares with Alice, the key she shares with Bob, and the key she shares with Chris. Okay. What we haven't done here at this problem, but this is kind of assumed. In order to establish the keys here, we need what's called a secure channel. A secure channel could be that the system administrator, you know, the guy who's in charge of the computer network, visits Alice and actually uploads 3 keys, and then he visits Bob and he uploads 3 keys, and Chris gets 3 keys, and Doro gets 3 keys. So we get something like a secure channel to establish the keys. But a secure channel is always needed at some point if we talk about symmetric ciphers. So what are the maybe let's first look at the end-user situation. This is for n equals 4. That doesn't sound that bad. If you have n users, and n can be any number, let's look at the number of keys in the system. So how many users then do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, blah, 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 blah. We have n users. And how many users does every key, how many keys does every user possess? n minus 1, very good. So this is roughly n square, hence the name, the n key distribution problem. So we have n square, you know, square number of keys. Of course, keys come in pair, right? Every key that you see has one counterpart. So the number of key pairs is what? Any ideas? If we have n times n minus 1 keys, how many key pairs do we have? Yeah, that divided by half, exactly. Which has this nice mathematical symbol, n über 2, n over 2, right? Okay, all of that doesn't seem very, earth-shattering complicated, but it's an interesting discussion that we have now, because now let's look at drawbacks. Nachteile. There are a whole bunch of problems with that, and I'll only give you two. Okay. One drawback here at this point is large number of keys. In parentheses quadratic. Namely, to give you an example, well, that doesn't sound that bad and square. If you punch in numbers, if you plug in numbers, things start to look a little scary. Let's have an example. Let's say we have a company with, I picked the number 750 employees, people. So this is not IBM or Volkswagen, right? This is deutscher Mittelstand, right? This is a mid-sized company. So we have Alice, Bob, Chris, Doro, blah, 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 and 746 other names, which I'm not going to draw here. How many keys do we need for this company if you're the system administrator? Well, you punch that in here, you have, do we have key pairs here? Yeah, so just the number of key pairs is 750 over 2. This is 280,875 key pairs. Which is a surprisingly large number for a small company. Now, of course, the question should be, is this a problem, this sheer number? Well, you have to look for probably an individual user. An individual user, after all, only stores 749 keys, right? We have K1, 2, 3, 4 up to K749. So this doesn't look that bad. So on a per user side, this is linear, but these keys have to be generated somewhere. So somewhere in the middle, we need what sometimes called a TA, a trusted authority, the system administrator, and that person has to push the keys out, and as it generates the keys and has to push the keys out. This is costly in one way or the other. You have a large number of keys, they must be generated, they must be pushed out. So this is not a particularly nice thing. Another drawback, which is probably the more serious drawback, is adding new users is complex, which is a very polite way of saying it's a pain to do. Maybe what happens? Okay, so let's say we add a new user, let's call him Noah. User number 5. What kind of keys does Noah need? Well, Noah needs this whole, set of keys, K, A, N, blah, 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 up to K, D, N. How do we get the keys over? Well, the system administrator maybe has to go to Noah's PC and, manually, von Hand, manually install the keys here. And here you could argue this is no big deal. There's a new PC setup that happens actually in my group. If we get a new PhD student, a new doctorand who joins the group, typically our system administrator goes there, set up the PC. There's some work involved, some effort involved anyway. But we're not done yet. What else do we have to do? Can Noah communicate with Alice at this moment? No. What's missing? Well, Alice needs an update, right? Bob needs an update. Chris needs an update. And Doro needs an update. And that's a pain. In this example, a company with 750 people, now you hire a new secretary, so you get employee number 751. This PC of the new secretary needs to get all new keys, again, which is maybe doable. What is completely unacceptable is now that we have to establish secure channels with all existing users in the network. Okay? This is not a very nice situation. And this is the reason why this kind of simple, naive setup is rarely used. It is used. I mean, I'm not saying this is completely stupid. For instance, think about a situation. You have a company, mid-sized company, headquartered in Germany, and then they have a sales office in France, in the US, and one in China. And for this situation, that might work very nicely because it's not that every day you get a new sales office in, I don't know, Czech Republic or something like that. That happens very rarely. That means if you have a small network, but maybe more importantly, a static network, ein statisches Netzwerk, where there isn't a much of coming and going of new users, these simple approaches might work. I do know personally about banking networks that use this type of approach. They're static keys. Outside Europe, that is. Okay? So I'm not saying this is like the most stupid thing to do, but in many cases it's impractical. So and what we want to do now, this was already the first part of the lecture here. What we want to do now, and maybe that comes as a little bit as a surprise, I want to show you a quite practical approach how to, distribute keys in a network, but not using Diffie-Hellman, but using AES or triple DES, using symmetric ciphers. So far always our Leseart, our understanding of crypto was, if you want to establish keys, for AES encryption, either you need the stupid thing, you need actually a person, a courier, who brings the key over, which is not great, or you use Diffie-Hellman. What I'm going to show you now, well, you can kind of get away without Diffie-Hellman. They're pretty good approaches for establishing keys for symmetric algorithm using symmetric algorithm. And they're not even complicated. It takes us, 15 minutes, and you all understand how that works. So this is the second part, is looking at what's called KDC protocols, or what we call KDC protocols. Is there one board left? No, there's no board left. Okay, so we start here. This is chapter number 2 for today. This is called Key Distribution Center KDC in Klammern base protocols. In case you were wondering what is the important part of the lecture today, the next 10 minutes. Wake up. Okay, it's about time to wake up. The next 10 minutes are useful to be awake. So what is the idea here? The idea is we have a central trusted authority. I'm not sure. Maybe you put that in quotation marks. It's somewhat of a fixed terminology, trusted authority, which for this protocol is called the KDC, but KDC acts as a trusted authority. Trusted authority will come up more often in the next few weeks. So that's a third party that is trusted by everyone. So it's not Oscar. So we have a central trusted authority that shares one key with every user. So now I have to draw a protocol. So for the protocol that I'm going to draw here, and of course that is in the book, I needed about 1/3 of a page. So if you're taking notes, it's the bottom of a page. Flip over, turn the page. So let's look at the protocol idea. So we have Alice. We do know Alice. We've known her for many, many months. We have Bob. And then what's new is we have this key distribution center. What this sentence there, the idea, what do I mean by that? That means the KDC is in possession of a key, which we just call KA here, which the key distribution center shares with Alice. How do we get that? Over at setup time, at some point you must establish this key. Okay. KDC also shares a key with Bob. The emphasis here is there's only one key per user. Here we had n keys per user. There's only one key per user, which you only have to establish once. And there's only one key for Bob, and it doesn't matter whether there are 2 parties in the network or 4 parties or 750 people. There's only one key here, which is one difference from before. It means also in practice, if there's 750 users, there would be K1, K2, K3, up to K750. And now the challenge is, how do we, if Alice and Bob want to communicate, how can they communicate? One way of doing it, which is a stupid way, and we're not doing that, would be Alice encrypts. Let's say Alice wants to send a message to Bob. Alice would encrypt the message with KA, send it to the KDC. KDC would decrypt and then encrypt again with KB and send it over. What are the problems with that? Could you follow this setup? What are the problems with that? Why is it not? Right, but we do have it. It's very good. We do have a secure channel here. We do have a secure channel via the keys, right? The keys act as a secure channel, and now we can do that. We can take a message, again, encrypt with KA, send it to KDC, decrypt, then encrypt with KB, send it to here. Here's why we're not doing that. One practical problem is all traffic would run through the KDC. That would be kind of a communication bottleneck, right? Everything would be sent to a central location. So what we do instead, and this is a new concept, and it's not super complicated, but it's interesting to see, and it's being used in practice. What we do instead is the following. Let's say Alice wants to communicate with Bob. Bob doesn't even know that Alice wants to communicate with him. So what Alice does first, she sends a request with her ID and Bob's ID, which can be the name or the whatever, social security number, passport number, employee number. So now the KDC sees, oh, Alice and Bob want to communicate. What he does, he generates random K session. So the random session key, which is something in the past we called it KAB, but now we call it session key. And here comes the interesting thing. Here comes the revolutionary concept which I introduced. The next 60 seconds, everybody's awake, everybody's sitting, very exciting. We encrypt the session key. So that means the KDC takes AES 256, using the key it shares with Alice, and encrypts the session key. It's exciting, right? It's really exciting. That's a new concept here, right? So you encrypt keys, which is something we haven't done before. You encrypt keys. KDC encrypts the session key for Alice, and he encrypts the session key for Bob using Bob's key. then it sends those two encrypted keys over to Alice. Any suggestions? What does Alice do? What can she do now with those two messages here? Let's start with the easy thing. What can she do with epsilon YA, epsilon R? Yep. Exactly. She can decrypt and recover the session key. You know, the session key is kind of wrapped, eingepackt, hidden, versteckt, whatever you want to say, in this YA. So she can decrypt, she can compute the session key by decrypting YA using this KA, the key she shares with the KDC. Can she do anything with YB here at this point? Yeah.
Maybe generate a signature?
No, not yet. Good idea, but we don't need it here. We should, but we don't. We do. The thing is, she can't do anything with YB. Okay, here's the cool thing. But she has a session key, and that session key means, session key after this request, that means this is a key between Alice and Bob. So what she can do now, she can start encrypting the message. So I don't know, how did I call it, Y? So if she has a message X, is our standard notation, she encrypts using the session key, she gets Y out. And in fact, she sends Y over the channel. Everybody still awake? Yeah, this is the cool stuff for today. Be awake. So now Bob gets Y. He said, I'm getting an email. He wants to read the email, so he starts decrypting. And it probably says, has an identifier of Alice on board. So this is the message coming from Alice. And it doesn't work. What kind of key does he need at this point for decryption here? Well, probably the session key. He doesn't have the session key. But where is the session key for Bob? What can he use? Yep. Exactly. Alice kann YB noch mitschicken. YB was sent here. Alice can't do anything with YB, but she can forward this. Very, very good. That means before Bob does this here, start actually the decrypting of the payload, the illegally downloaded movie or whatever, whatever, Facebook, I don't know what you guys do. So here, before she does that, he has to recover the session key, and he can recover that from YB. So he does the same step that Alice did here. Bob computes the session key. It means he takes YB, he decrypts using what? Using this key that he shares with the KDC. And he gets out the session key. And then he uses this session key for decrypting is illegally downloaded, the movie that Alice illegally downloaded. So let's look a little bit at the setup. What we did before here, we kind of tried to do counting. How many keys are there? Ja, Frage? Ja, sicher.
Wieso muss gerade jetzt YB zu Alice schicken, damit Alice wieder zurückschickt?
Genau, gut. Ja. Was ist die Alternative? Genau. Sehr gute very good question. He says, why does he send it this way? And actually, if you look in the books, this is protocol number 2. Protocol number 1 in the book is that YB doesn't go here, but YB goes here, which is fine. Okay. I like this protocol is a tiny bit more advanced. What's a little bit one advantage here, you have fewer communication. You have only 1-2 communication. You have 1-2-3, but you're right. Maybe that's more intuitive. The other problem with if you do that in practice, Alice sends this request, Alice gets this message, but Bob might know about this, that Alice wants to communicate with him. Okay, then actually in practice we use something like this. Alice says, I want to send an email to Bob, please get me ready, and then the KDC gets ready, and then everybody arrives. But a good point. I think from security-wise, you can do that. This is not a problem. Yeah.
So the keys KA, KD,
they're static. Yeah. Statische Schlüssel, they're static.
But what if during the first establishment, if Oscar gets the KA?
Well, you're in trouble if you get. I have a PGP key, right? A secret. If I write that down, my 2048 bits, I'm in trouble, right? This is part of cryptography. At some point, the keys that have to be kept secret. But it's a very good point here. They shouldn't become public, and we're going to discuss that in a few minutes. A very good remark. So let's look at this, number of keys, which we thought is an undesirable feature in this case. If we look at the situation where we not only have Alice and Bob, but we have many users. If we have n users, the general case. The number of key pairs, that means of static keys, there's exactly 1 per user, right? Alice and KDC has 1, Bob and the KDC share 1, and so forth. So it means if you have n user, we have n keys. That means this is linear complexity as opposed to the quadratic complexity here. And is that right? Yeah, key pairs are. This is still quadratic, right? Quadratic square times constant, which is great. So we have a linear complexity. This is very good. Key. Well, there's key pairs. Yeah, keys is how many keys are in the system, static keys? No. And keys are 2n. Let's count. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. 4 Schlüssel, 2 User. Okay. This is a funny metric. And it's trivial. I'm sorry. Didn't mean to be funny, but that's what we did here, right? Here we get, we said KAB is 2 keys or 1 key pair. Doesn't play any role in practice, so don't get confused. This is completely unimportant. What is not unimportant is that this is a linear complexity, and it doesn't matter whether we count keys or key pairs. It's just a factor of 2. What does make a difference, if we come back to our company with 750 people, there are only 750 keys in the system and not 280,875. So it's a much more handlebar complexity. What is the other big advantage here? Before we identified this problem of Noah was the troublemaker, right? If Noah enters the network, we have to update not only Noah with a secure channel, that means the TA needs a secure channel to upload all these keys, but the central authority has to revisit all existing users, which is a pain. What about here? What happens if Chris enters a network? What does the KDC has to do? KDC needs to add a key KC here, KC to its database, and that's it. We are done. Right? You need only secure channel between this new user somehow. Need a secure channel to establish the key. But first of all, only one secure channel and only at setup time. And I gave you this example before, and this is quite realistic. If you establish a new user, there is work involved, and you might, and it's maybe likely that you do need a secure channel at this, and that you do have a secure channel at this moment. Okay, I can give you another example. I'm only always talking about network as in computer network. Another example, which is a general area where my group does a lot of work, is this embedded stuff. Embedded is Geldkarte here, Postbank. Okay, this is embedded stuff. There's crypto on this, and there's a lot of crypto on it. And for instance, here, this situation that you need at setup time, if a new user enters the system, for instance, if a new smart card is being printed, is being generated, where's the secure channel? Well, the secure channel is in the factory, for instance. If this is being printed, they call it Personalisierung of a smart card, personalization of a smart card. This is loading crypto keys in the smart card at the end of the conveyor belt, am Ende des Fließbands. So, there's not really a Fließband, but this is a good metaphor. So after you're done with, gluing that together and bonding and soldering, löten and stuff, at the end people put crypto keys in, and you do have a secure channel in the factory. And then you give it out to me, and you don't have a secure channel anymore. Right? At this moment, it's really difficult for Postbank to upgrade the triple desk key on here. But when they manufacture that at the end of the conveyor belt, it's pretty easy. So what I'm trying to say here is getting a key over once at setup time is in many scenarios realistic. It's not very difficult. So, and here now the big advantage is we can add new users. Adding new users or adding a new user only requires secure channel KDC user at initialization time. Gut. Which was probably the biggest problem about over this naive approach we discussed first. A remark: the static keys Ka, Kb, Kc are called, not often, but sometimes they're called quotation marks key encryption keys. Or KEX. I do like this abbreviation, KEX. Okay, key encryption keys. So we're almost done. What I want to do now, towards the end of today's lecture, I want to talk about the weaknesses. There was a very good remark by the student here. He said, so what happens if somebody gets Ka And I said, you're in trouble, and that is true. Okay, you're in trouble if you get Ka. That means for an attacker, it's attractive to get Ka. Let's do a Gedankenexperiment, which is an English word. You know that? Gedankenexperiment is like Kindergarten. It's like Webster's dictionary. It's Gedankenexperiment. So let's do a Gedankenexperiment, a thought experiment. There's a fairy, a fée, and I know there are no fairies, but let's pretend there's a fairy. Okay, so a fairy comes and you have one wish. Okay, and it's a hacker fairy. So the hacker fairy grants you one wish and say, "I'm hacking in one system for you," and you have three choices. And you know, I steal the keys. I have Alice or Bob or Chris or any other or the KDC. Which one do you take? KDC, and exactly. And what should the fairy bring back? KA, KB, or KC, or all? All, of course, right? CD-ROM, right? Big USB stick, right? Hard disk, 1 gigabyte, all the keys. So that means this is, in fancy terminology, that's a single point of failure, right? If you have an attacker or a terrorist or whatever who managed to get in the KDC, you're really in trouble. So the weakness here is, first weakness, KDC is a single point of failure. And now comes the big thing. Again, I should have told you, you could have gone back to sleep for a while, but now you have to wake up again. Now comes the new concept. Let's assume the fairy becomes reality and you do get a key. And it doesn't matter whether you get all keys or let's do an easy. I don't care. Let's say all keys. Let's start easy. Let's start. You did a mistake or you have a weak fairy and the fairy only managed to break into Alice's computer or install malware on Alice's computer so you only get KA. And let's say it's a really stupid fairy. She is installing malware. She's sending out KA, but for whatever reason Alice noticed that. You know, there was a break-in, the antivirus program somehow gives a message, oh, KA has been compromised. Okay? So what do? You probably stop using it, right? So what you could do then is it's a pain, but somehow, you know, you get a secure channel and you establish a new secret key and, you know, the attacker doesn't have KA prime anymore. But what happens is if the attacker recorded previous communication, let's say the attacker recorded Y, he recorded and stored Y, what can the attacker do? You know, communication you did yesterday. Well, he has KA, right, Oscar? So, he actually has to store that too. So if he stored YA and Y, the attacker can use this key here to recover the key and to decrypt your messages here. And he can do that with the message you sent yesterday, the day before that, the messages you sent last year, and so forth. And this is a big general problem. That means if an attacker is there, even if you notice the attack, of course, from now on in the future, if you notice the attack, you would be stupid to keep using that, and you can update the key. The problem is everything that happens in the past. Where's the past? Is this? Where is this? Yeah, this way, right? This is the time axis, right? Time axis runs this. So stuff that happens in the past, including years ago, if you never change the key, if you don't have key freshness, if you never change the key, you could be in trouble here at this point. So, and this is a very important principle, namely the second big weakness here. No, and this is a new term, and this is not something I'm making up or I just like. This is widely used and well defined. No perfect forward secrecy. Meaning, if the keys, the key encryption keys or the static keys, if the keys are compromised, kompromittiert, also they are in trouble, right? People got them. Are compromised, all past communication can be decrypted. This is a problem. Okay. Oh, here's the abbreviation. This is PFS. So this is a fixed term. And we are not, by the way, we are not the protocol lecture in your curriculum, in your bachelor's program or master program. There's a follow-up lecture on 2-semester course on network security where people are going to talk a lot about PFS. Don't worry. Okay, this is just first time you encountered that. What do we do? Essentially nothing. We have to live with that. There are some protocols that have perfect forward secrecy. We're going to talk about that next week or maybe the week after, because we talk about public key-based protocols, and in some of them you do have perfect forward secrecy. In some you don't. So you do have to live with that. What do we have to do? Well, make sure that the database of the KDC, where all the keys, with whatever 750 keys are stored, that this is really, really very, very, very secure. So one other remark I forgot to mention earlier is KDC is the basis for Kerberos. Has anyone heard about the Kerberos protocol for 1, 2, 3, 4? Okay, so it's the basis for Kerberos, which is what I'm trying to say here, this is a very popular commercial system that's used in the real world. It's based on this approach, and in the book there's a simplified version of Kerberos, which is more complicated than what you see here, but this is the principle. Okay, so this is not completely yet another system that doesn't really work. You have to add things like timestamp to that, and you can make that work. The other weaknesses here, and this is the other attacks possible, there's a replay attack, and there is what's called the key confirmation attack, which is not something we're doing here. So this is compare in our textbook. They're not very complicated, it's just we're running a little bit out of time today. And actually, Dr. Dürmuth might do the key confirmation attack, which is a more complicated one in the Übung. Any questions? What's it? No. That's it for today. Thank you very much.